Welcome to this explainer. Right out of the gate, we're diving into a deeply mythic fable. We're looking at two historical witnesses, completely separated by time, who describe the exact same cosmic accident. If you've been following our discussions on existentialism and nihilism, you know the stakes here are massive. We're going to explore the archetype of the dark sage through the eyes of two men who lived millennia apart. Yet somehow, they arrived at the exact same startling conclusion about human ambition. To begin our descent, we need to understand the ancient concept of hevel. It's a Hebrew word, and it translates to a breath or a vapor closing around an open hand. Just picture that imagery for a second. It represents this cold, almost shocking realization that all human ambition, no matter how grandly we dress it up, is literally just vapor closing around an empty fist. It's the realization that the wheel of human hunger is turning toward no promised destination whatsoever. Part 1. The Summit of Futility. Let's start with a king in Jerusalem who sat down to measure the true worth of ambition. We're talking about the biblical sage Qoheleth. He methodically exhausted every single avenue of acquisition available to a human being. He built the vast houses, planted sprawling vineyards, gathered up the treasure of provinces, and denied his eyes absolutely nothing they desired. And here's the thing, he tells us this not to brag, but to disqualify any suspicion that his conclusion came from someone who just failed. He got it all, comprehensively. He did this specifically to remove that everyday excuse we all use, that idea that you just need to try harder or want more to finally be happy.
And his final verdict after all that? He realized that the acquiring itself had been the disease. Right at the absolute summit of success, the king discovered that the summit had absolutely no view worth the grueling climb. You see, his ambition didn't fail through bad luck or a lack of effort. It succeeded completely. And that complete success cruelly and definitively removed ambition's last excuse. It turns out the object was never actually the problem.
Part 2. The Wheel of Cosmic Will. 2,000 years later, an ocean of language away, that same crushing realization happens again. We basically have two separate libraries, acting as two witnesses, arriving independently at the identical cold diagnosis. On one side, Qoheleth in Jerusalem discovers futility empirically from a royal throne, working within the context of scripture and searching for some divine purpose. On the other side, Arthur Schopenhauer in Frankfurt derives futility structurally from a philosopher's study. Schopenhauer is approaching this from a secular void, completely replacing any notion of divine design with the blind hunger of the cosmic will. Working entirely without scripture, Schopenhauer located our misery right in the machinery of desire itself. He called it will, or will, a blind, striving force underlying all appetite, all hunger, and all reaching. He argued that our appetite is actually rigged against satisfaction from its very design. We are wired with this hunger that is built completely, entirely, without an off switch. So we end up trapped in this inescapable loop. Think about it. First, the organism experiences desire. Second, that desire is satisfied, creating a brief relief that we mistakenly call pleasure. Third, that relief instantly produces an immediate vacancy. And finally, that vacancy is immediately refilled by a brand new desire. We are basically condemned to run endlessly on a wheel that we mistakenly believe is a road leading somewhere. Part 3. The Burden of Clear Sight. Understanding the terrible emotional cost of accepting this truth without flinching is absolutely crucial. In much wisdom is much grief. Qoheleth's sorrow accumulates precisely because his wise eye simply cannot unsee the exhausting pattern that the foolish eye is totally spared from. Neither of these men treats his melancholy as a failure of temperament or something to be fixed. The sage isn't sad because something went wrong. He's carrying this heavy burden because something went right. He sees the truth with absolute accuracy. They both argue that optimism isn't just a simple mistake, it's structurally dishonest. It's basically a filter we install because the unfiltered view is judged entirely too difficult for ordinary use. But stripping away that filter comes at a heavy cost. This clear-sightedness creates profound social isolation and a deep emotional exhaustion because the sage stops consenting to the comfortable, cheerful errors that everyone else around him is happily practicing. Part 4. Divergent Paths to Salvation. So while both men share the exact same diagnosis of our worldly agony, their prescriptions for surviving it are radically different. Think of it as the small table versus the clear table. Qoheleth, the biblical sage, sets a small table. He counsels proportion, eating his modest bread with joy because he knows the grand cosmic gift was never actually on offer. But Schopenhauer, he demands a cleared table, total ascetic starvation and the denial of all desire. Why? Because for him, starving the will is the absolute only logical escape. You have to totally starve that insatiable palace of will that built the exhausting trap in the first place. Part 5. The sage meets the optimist. Now, let's see how modern psychology unexpectedly validates this ancient scripture and German idealism. Picture a final mythic encounter between these two archetypes. On one side, the optimistic youth. They're marching forward, reliably overestimating their control, relying on a brittle confidence that constantly requires artificial warmth and daily rearmoring just to function. On the other side stands the dark sage, armed with what modern psychology calls depressive realism. The sage accurately measures reality and the odds. They possess a planar, load-bearing steadiness that simply declines to predict entirely. It's an ultimate clash between the need for comfort and the absolute demand for truth. The emotional weather of sorrow doesn't actually cloud judgment. It simply declines to warm it artificially. In this context, the melancholic temperament isn't some illness to be corrected by brighter weather or therapy. It's actually the closest available human approximation of metaphysical accuracy. Sorrow is just the byproduct of seeing the world exactly as it is. Part 6. Ice that needs no warmth. We're finally entering a slow descent from arrogance into profound silence, discovering the exact posture required to survive an indifferent universe. The dark sage achieves true stability, not by putting on more armor, but by the steady subtraction of every claim he was never entitled to make in the first place. He stops paying rent on control he never owned. He prices in the absolute worst the ledger can show. He completely declines to predict the future. And by doing all of that, he discovers a remarkably solid floor that neither hope nor dread can ever crack. Bravery, in this reading, looks like standing on the ice of an indifferent universe, without demanding, first, that it certify its own solidity. True endurance requires absolutely no faith in a friendly outcome. It is the cold, sturdy comfort of continuing to walk after completely surrendering the illusion of a guaranteed shore. I'll leave you with this final thought for this explainer, urging you to really question your own need for optimism when standing in the silent dark. Will you continue to demand the false comfort of control, or are you brave enough to step out onto the ice? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this incredible fable of the dark sage. Keep thinking critically, and I will see you in the next explainer.